Yeah, family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So the church in Jerusalem, we know, where did Christ die? Jesus died in Jerusalem, was crucified outside of Jerusalem. The whole story of the gospel is about how it was that he was up here in the north, in his home, the area of his hometown, Nazareth, Galilee, up north, and how it is that he's traveling toward Jerusalem, and he's like Raphael. He knows he's going to die. The Gospel of Luke is all about the journey to Jerusalem. He knows he's going to die, but does he turn around and run? No. He keeps facing Jerusalem. And Luke keeps using that expression, right? That he faced Jerusalem, and he just kept going in the direction of Jerusalem. Like Raphael. Jesus and Raphael, two of my heroes. Right? So Jerusalem was the city where Jesus died. And Jerusalem then became the center of the church. Who led the church in Jerusalem? It wasn't Peter. It was James, the brother of the Lord. We hear that in scriptures. James, whose brother was he? Jesus' brother. Think about that for a moment. How do we interpret that? Again, we don't know. As Catholics, we always believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary based on this mistranslation of the word maiden or young woman. When we translate it as virgin, then of course after that we believed in her as the Blessed Virgin Mary, so Mary couldn't have any other kids. However, if we recognize that it was a mistranslation, then many of our Protestant brothers and sisters have no problem at all with thinking that Mary had other kids. So Mary had other kids. So what? Big deal? Right? So James, the brother of the Lord, however that's to be interpreted, whether he was an actual blood brother or a close relative, cousin or whatever, we know that there was this relative of Jesus who led the early church after Jesus was crucified. How fascinating. Even though Jesus was dead, crucified, some family member stepped up and was leading the church. We have then this strong church in Jerusalem under the leadership of James, the brother of the Lord. Dulce is giving us a look. We're going to pause just a moment to see what Dulce is thinking.
Mi pregunta es, ¿tuvo más hijos la Virgen María?
So the question is, did Mary have more children? We don't know. There are certain things that we don't know and we may never know. So according to the Bible, James, the brother of the Lord, was the head of the church in Jerusalem. What does that mean? That he was Jesus' brother? Was he Jesus' blood brother? Was he Jesus' friend? And was just like, hey bro, how's it going, bro? Chewy, hey bro. Right? Was he the actual blood brother? Was he a cousin? Because they often use,
John and James.
So.
Well, James wasn't the only one. There was a brother of Jesus, right?
So there are other passages in Scripture where it says, your brothers and sisters are outside, right? He's there teaching in a house, and they come to him and say, your brothers and sisters are outside. How do you interpret that? Your brothers and your sisters are outside? Was Jesus from a family like the rest of us?
But who is my brother? Really, well, the way I've heard it is, who is my brother and who is my mother, if not the people that do the will of God?
Well,
So that's
as
how
he
the story
says, we
goes.
all are brothers and sisters in Christ.
So we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. That is clear. From the early moments in the church, we're going to start calling ourselves brother and sister, right? We're going to start calling ourselves brother and sister. But how interesting that in the scriptures, the church in Jerusalem was led by James, the brother of Jesus. Jesus' brother James, however that's to be interpreted. I'm not saying that there's one way to interpret it. We're going to interpret it in different ways based on what it is that you believe. I'm not going to tell you that you're right or wrong. Different people look at this book and see different things. Different people look at James, the brother of the Lord, and see different things. Some see him as Jesus' blood brother. Some see him as his cousin. Some see him as, hey bro, how's it going? Just a friend. Whatever. But what we do know is that there's a strong church in Jerusalem. Now what's going to happen is we're going to see a split now between two different types of person. In this context, we know that Hellenism was going on. What's Hellenism? When the Greeks would conquer different peoples and there was this mixing of cultures. So we have people who are dedicated Hebrews, and we also have people who are mixing with other Greeks and with Greek culture a little more. We call them Hellenists. Which were the apostles? Were the apostles Hebrews or were the apostles Hellenists? Ooh, think about that for a moment. Were the early apostles, the first 12, were they Hebrews, Jews, or were they Hellenists, Jews who are now being mixed with various Greek customs? The early apostles were Jews. So they were Hebrews. Early apostles were Hebrews. But in the Acts of the Apostles now, we have a predicament. There are certain people who are not being fed, who are not having their needs met. We're going to designate 7 people to take care of them. Are we going to designate Hebrews or Hellenists? In the Acts of the Apostles, we designate Hellenists. What's the difference? So, the apostles, the first 12 were Hebrews. Now this shows a mixing of Hebrews and Hellenists. So the church is not just Hebrews. Church is not just those people who spoke that language and were in that culture. Now there are going to be 2 cultures coming together. The Hebrews, who are still the 12, who are the preachers and the teachers. But also those who served tables, the first deacons, were Hellenists. Interesting. So in the Acts of the Apostles, we choose 7 people. They were all guys, incidentally, at that time, according to the writer. We chose 7 people to be able to help out serving people's needs, and those first deacons were Hellenists. So now, how interesting, we have 2 cultures for the first time within the church. We were all Jews, we were all Hebrews, but now some of us are Greek Jews, Hellenized Jews. These Hellenists are the first deacons in the church. Stephen, the first martyr, he's a Hellenist. We presume. Why do we presume? Because the 7 who are named all have Greek names. 12 apostles, they don't have Greek names. They probably weren't Greeks. They were probably country bumpkins or fishermen, people who were living in this area who had names that reflected this area. Now for the first time we have Hellenists in Jerusalem who have Greek names. People like Stephen. So these 7 Hellenists were appointed to serve tables while the 12, the Hebrews, continued to preach and teach. So we have the joining of these 2 cultures. Saul, we've heard that name before. Who was Saul? Saul later became Paul. So before he was Paul, he was known as Saul. And while he was Saul, what was he doing? He was killing Jews. The question becomes, what type of Jews was he killing? Was Saul going after Hebrews, or was Saul going after Hellenists? Was Saul going after the apostles? Was he chasing down people like Peter? Where's Peter? I'm going to find Peter and kill him. He wasn't going after the Hebrews. He was going after the Hellenists. How interesting. He was going after and persecuting those who were mixing the elements of Jewish religion with the Hellenistic culture. So Saul seemed to ignore the apostles in Jerusalem. Instead, he persecutes Stephen, a Hellenist. After the death of Stephen,
Well, I thought he was just there. He wasn't.
he was just there. We have no record that he threw stones. He was just there witnessing it. So, thank you for the clarification. Don't want to make it sound like he was actually going after him and seeking them out. He was somehow there, present. What his role was, we'll never
Marshal.
discern.
It was Marshall.
Whether he was marshal, whether he was just holding people's cloaks as they were taking off their cloaks as they were moving. I mean, we only have our imaginations that we can rely on at this point. After Stephen's death, the next person that we turn to in the Acts of the Apostles talks about the death of Stephen. After that, we talk about the story of Philip. Who was Philip? Philip was another one of the 7, which means he was Hebrew or Hellenist. Philip was a Hellenist. Okay? So, Philip, this Hellenist now, is founding a church where? In Samaria. How interesting. So here we were in the church in Jerusalem. Now the church is going to start to spread. Follow me now. The church arrived in Austin, Texas. How did it get from Jerusalem to Austin, Texas? It first started spreading outside of Jerusalem. Outside of Judah. First place outside of Judah then was in Samaria, this land between Judah and Israel and Galilee on the north. So first, Philip, a Hellenist, is going to take the faith to Samaria, but still they're acknowledging the authority of the apostles who were the Hebrews. The idea that we're getting is that the Hebrews, we're still going back to that time when the Hebrews were in charge of the church. The Jews like Peter and James and John, they were Jews. But we who are Hellenists are now taking that message to other places, subject to their authority. So Peter and John are still going to come and preach in Samaria, but we are the ones who are going out and evangelizing in their names. Early Christians didn't consider themselves a new religion. We weren't a new religion. We were Jews. Peter was a Jew. The 12 apostles were Jews. The 7, even though they were Hellenists, they were Jews. Paul, what religion was he? He was a Jew. We were all Jews. And so just in the same way that there were these different parties or sects within Judaism, Christians, what are they going to be? Christians really are just the new party or sect, if you will. We're Jews. We believe in those things that hold us together. We are ethical monotheists with eschatological hope. We have those two qualities that we have in common with them. The only difference is, they have their differences. Our difference as part of this list is that we believe that the Messiah came. We're Jews for Jesus. Right? That's what makes us different. We're Jews for Jesus. We believe that Jesus was the Messiah. So all of these Jews, we were all Jews, now Jews for Jesus. We continued worshiping in Jewish ways. We continued our Jewish practices. We would go to the temple. We would celebrate Sabbath. It's just that now as Jews for Jesus, we had certain things that distinguished us from all of our other Jewish brothers and sisters. What were some of those things that we did? For instance, we celebrated the Sabbath, and then the very next morning, the first day of the week, Sunday we call it now, we would gather on Sunday morning to break bread at sunrise. We'd watch the sun come up together, and we'd break bread in Jesus' memory. We were Jews. We were just like all of our other Jewish brothers and sisters. We were Jews in every way. The only difference between us and them is that we were Jews for Jesus. We believed Jesus was the Messiah. We gathered on Sunday mornings to break bread in his memory. The early celebration, when we gathered to break bread, were we focusing on his cross and on his death? No, because when Jesus rose, a new age dawned, which is why we're always looking at the sun and celebrating at sunrise, because a new age dawned. Jesus now was the sun, the light of the world. We are celebrating that in his resurrection, he rose in the same way that the sun is rising. Jesus rose from the dead. How's that for a great analogy, right? It's all dark, sort of like in our tombs. Imagine the day that you die. It's all dark inside your tomb. And then what happens at resurrection? Light and rising, like the sun coming up in the, out of the darkness. What a great symbol that we Jews for Jesus, we're now celebrating him in that way. Were we focusing on his death? No, we were focused on his resurrection. Did we have crucifixes and crosses in the place where we worship? No, the focus was on Jesus risen. Jesus is risen from the dead, resurrected. Paul refers to various early pillars in the church. He talks about Peter and John in his letter to the Galatians. Another pillar of the church then was James, the brother of Jesus. Jesus' brother James in Jerusalem was another pillar of the church. Was he one of the 12? Was he one of the early apostles? No. How interesting. We have 2 apostles whose names were James. We know them today as St. James the Greater and St. James the Lesser. Poor guy. Can you imagine having that name for all of eternity? James the Greater, James the Lesser, and now we have James, Jesus' brother, who's the head of the church in Jerusalem. Third pillar of the church. So now we're all Jews for Jesus. When are we going to get a new name for ourselves? When are we going to call ourselves Christians? Because we're Jews. You follow me? So how do we go from being Jews to being something else now? Because all of us were Jews. It's just that we were Jews for Jesus. But what's going to happen now is that this Jewish church is going to start to go down, and the Gentile church is going to start to rise. So that, for instance, James, the brother of John, so we're going to see all of these Jews are going to start to be killed. Follow me now, right? As more Jews are killed, the numbers go down. As more Gentiles join us, the number goes up of Gentiles. Who are some of the Jews that are being killed? James, the brother of John, and James, the brother of Jesus, are both going to be killed in 44 and 62 AD. So those are 2 James who bite the dust. Shortly thereafter, the Christians, now that James has been killed in Jerusalem, are the rest of us who are Christians going to be hanging around and waiting for them to kill us too? No. Maybe Rafaela. But the rest of us are getting out of maybe so. She's very steadfast. And if it's God's will that I die here in Jerusalem, I'll die here in Jerusalem. She's staying. The rest of us, though, are all heading for the hills. Right? Where are we heading for? The new church moves from Jerusalem. How interesting. This is fascinating history. The church moves out of Jerusalem and into the city of Pella, which is a Gentile city on the other side of the Jordan River. So now we're taking ourselves, we are all running, now that our Jewish brothers, James, the brother of John, and James, the brother of Jesus, have both been killed. Raphael is staying behind. The rest of us are hitting the road, heading for Pella, which is not a Jewish city, it's a Gentile city. We're going to stay in Pella until 135 AD, which means that during these roughly 70 years that we're in Pella, we have our kids have kids, their kids have kids. So now our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, are they Jews connected here to Jerusalem in the same way? They're being raised in a Gentile area. And so what's going to happen to the leadership of the church? The Jews are dying out, being martyred, and otherwise moving out. All the rest of us have run. We've run for a Gentile city named Pella. We're no longer in Jerusalem during these years. How fascinating. You know, when we trace the Pope, I don't know about you, but when I was back in the seminary in the Roman Catholic Church, we traced the Pope all the way back to, sort of like this unbroken line of bishops. Wait a minute. A bishop, if there was a first bishop in Jerusalem, which we didn't use those terms back then, but what happened was there was a time when we all hit the road and then later came back. Pella was the place where we sought our refuge. Shortly thereafter, how interesting, another relative of Jesus, and we don't know who Simeon was. This is not the Simeon to be confused with the Gospel of Luke. This is another Simeon. Now, Simeon was an old man in the Gospel of Luke, but now there's another Simeon who's going to be in charge of the church after it moves to Pella. Simeon, who is part of Jesus' family. How interesting. It's almost like a family thing going on here, right? Jesus is killed, and then his brother leads the church in Jerusalem, and then another family member leads the church in Pella. So that what's happening during this time is that the Jewish church is finding itself in a very interesting place. We're Jews for Jesus. Our Jewish brothers and sisters hate us because we're no longer part of who they are. They won't speak with us anymore. And the Gentiles just think that we're weird too because we're these Jews for Jesus. They're not speaking. So we're considered outcasts, marginalized by both the Jews that we used to love and the Gentiles among whom we live. It's not a popular thing to be a Jew for Jesus. By 135, we'd moved back to Jerusalem. Now we were all Gentiles. So how interesting that the leadership of the church in Jerusalem now is no longer Jews. It's Gentiles, non-Jews. The church is now dominated by Gentiles, although we'll continue to appeal to the Jews, telling them that we're Jews for Jesus. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we're Jews. Y'all are Jews. We're Jews too. We're Jews for Jesus. Will you listen to us? We'll tell you about that Messiah that you're waiting for has come. We'll tell you. His name was Jesus. So we're adding to our list of sects within Judaism, the Jews for Jesus. We didn't call ourselves that, but that's what we were. We were Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And so what message do we have for all of our Jewish brothers and sisters? All of you who are Jews, we've got good news for you. We're Jews too, and we know who the Messiah is. Jesus. Born of Mary, born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, died in Jerusalem. Let me tell you the story of the Messiah. So what happens when the church is being persecuted, right? The church is being persecuted in Jerusalem. Gotta decide. Are we going to stay in Jerusalem or are we heading out? Don't know about you. I'm out of here. Church moved to Pella into a Gentile context.
That was an interesting observation that Christianity was spread by all these people and not necessarily Paul. Huh?
So it's fascinating. We'll get to that in the next chapter. You're letting the cat out of the bag. I love it. The next chapter, essentially what did he say? Let's not exaggerate the influence of Paul. Back when we have the story of the Pauline letters, we talked about Og Mandino and how Og called Paul the greatest salesman on earth in the world. The greatest salesman in the world was St. Paul, going around and spreading Christianity. Dr. Gonzalez gives a different view. He says, you know what, it wasn't all up to Paul. Did Paul take Christianity to Rome? No. There were Christians in Rome long before, and we know that because he was writing to them. Don't give Paul too much credit. There were all sorts of people who were Jews for Jesus and who were traveling all over with this message of how it is that Jesus is the Messiah we've been waiting for. All sorts of common, ordinary people like you and me doing what we do, and when we travel and go to a place, right? When I'm going down in San Marcos this weekend, I'm going to be talking with my family members and friends about how it is that the Messiah has come. I wonder if they know, right?